25 minutes before 9 o'clock, it's time for NewsBites. This is the portion of AM Ocala Live where Robin McBlain and I will read news from the different news agencies from around the world, around the nation, around the state, and around town in some cases. And we will abbreviate those stories. We'll shorten them for the very purpose of squeezing in as much news as possible in the next 25 minutes. Typically, each weekday morning, we're able to get between 20 and 25 stories out there to you. It gives you a chance to listen to your radio and catch up on the news from around the world without having to spend all day doing so. Remember, we also give the news agency that the story is coming to us from so that you can look it up online and see the details of the story for yourself. Most of these stories are being covered by several different news agencies, if not all of the major news agencies. The first story is from ABC News. Fraser Glenn Cross, the man accused of murder in the shooting of 3 people outside of Jewish facilities in Kansas last week, was, for all practical purposes, born at the age of 49. The federal government gave him that name when he was released from prison in 1990, along with a new Social Security number and a new place to live not far from the Missouri River in western Iowa. The idea was to erase any connection to the man he had been before Fraser Glenn Miller, white nationalist leader, spewer of hate, federal informant. I joined the family in Sioux City, Iowa, Miller wrote later in his self-published autobiography. I enrolled in a truck driving school, and I've been trucking ever since, and I love it. After prison, the freedom of the open road is gloriously exhilarating, he wrote. Less than 3 years earlier, Miller had been a fugitive from justice, the subject of a nationwide manhunt after he had declared war on blacks and Jews, exhorting his thousands of followers to violently overthrow the very government that would soon become his protector. He wrote, "Let the blood of our enemies flow into the streets, rivers, and fields of the nation. Rise up and throw off the chains which bind us to the satanic, Jewish-controlled and ruled federal government. Let the battle axes swing smoothly and the bullets whisk true." I guess that's a misspelling, and it's probably intentional misspelling. In the early morning hours of April 30th, 1987, more than 36 federal and state law enforcement agents surrounded a mobile home in Ozark, Missouri. A van recently purchased by Miller in Louisiana had been spotted outside by an agent the day before. The story, if it sounds interesting, I'll just stop it right there for the sake of abbreviating it. There was no real way to abbreviate that one without reading to the point where it felt like I was jumping off a cliff there. But if you want to read the whole story, it is on abcnews.com.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of the Disney attraction It's a Small World and the song that goes with it. Now, at least one entertainment site is reporting that Disney is using the occasion of the anniversary to launch a motion picture based on the attraction. According to Deadline.com, Disney has chosen John Turteltaub to direct the movie and has selected a writer and producers for the film. Turteltaub is a familiar face with Disney, though his track record has not always been even at the box office. He was at the head of several popular Disney productions, such as Cool Runnings and National Treasure, as well as a somewhat quirky but well-received The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Also being brought on board is Jared Stern, according to Deadline. Stern contributed to movies which included the surprise hit Wreck-It Ralph, which was an animated comedy about a video game character who chose to break from his traditional part as video game heavy and become a hero. The Deadline report indicates that the movie could become a franchise if it works out. No dates regarding casting or filming have been released so far, reported by the Florida News Network.
And this is from the Associated Press. An Afghan security guard opened fire on a group of doctors at a Kabul hospital this morning, killing 3 American physicians and wounding a U.S. nurse. The shooting at Cure International Hospital in western Kabul was the latest in a string of deadly attacks on foreign civilians in the Afghan capital this year. Two of the dead were a visiting father and son, Minister of Health Soraya Dali said, adding that the other victim was a Cure International doctor who had worked for 7 years in Kabul. She said an American nurse had also been wounded in the attack. The attacker was a member of the Afghan Public Protection Force assigned to guard the hospital, according to District Police Chief Hafiz Khan. He said the man's motive has not yet been made clear.
Crime is not what it used to be, according to a report issued by Florida state law enforcement officials. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement, in its Uniform Crime Report, says crime in the Sunshine State has fallen to a 43-year low. The FDLE report indicates that the crime rate, based on a per 100,000 population benchmark, dropped 4.7% in 2013 as compared to the year prior. The total number of crimes was down by 3.8%. Officials said violent crimes overall were down 2.4%, with murders leading the way in declines. There were 3.9% fewer murders in 2013 than in 2012. Law enforcement officials said it was worth noting that the crime rate went down even as the state's population continued to grow. 2 law enforcement officers were killed in the line of duty last year. 2 other law officers died by accident. The figures also indicated that crime dropped in Florida's most densely populated counties. Crime was down by 6.3% in Broward County, 6.4% in Hillsborough County, 2.9% in Miami-Dade County, and 0.5% in Pinellas County, reported by the Florida News Network.
The next story is from Fox News. Jeb Bush said yesterday that he is thinking about running for president in his most direct statement yet about a possible 2016 run. The former Florida governor spoke at a Catholic school benefit in New York yesterday morning. He previously has said he'll make a decision on whether to run for president before the end of this year, making clear that he was considering the possibility. But his comments yesterday appeared to be more direct. Asked what his immediate plans were, he said, according to an attendee, "I'm thinking about running for president." The answer was met with applause and a standing ovation, after which Bush said, "Can someone call my mother so she can hear this?"
A rogue cop shot and killed at least 3 Americans at a children's hospital in the Afghan capital today, this morning, officials said.
We just did that story.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to duplicate something you had.
I'm sorry. President Obama has a loyal supporter in George Clooney. The Las Vegas Review-Journal reports the politically minded Oscar winner abruptly exited a diner with hotel and casino mogul Steve Wynn after the two had a heated argument over the commander-in-chief. This is a quote. "He called the president and it rhymes with glass bowl. That is a fact." Clooney emailed the paper via his publicist. "I said the president was my longtime friend, and then he said your friend is rhymes with glass bowl. At that point, I told Steve that he was rhymes with glass bowl, and I was not going to sit at his table while he was being such a blank, 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 and I walked out." That is a quote from George Clooney. There were obviously quite a few more adjectives and adverbs used by both sides. Those are all the facts. This all happened during dinner 2 weeks ago at a restaurant inside Wynn's Encore Hotel. Clooney was in Sin City to promote his Casimogos tequila brand at the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers of America convention, reported by MSN.
And from the Associated Press, a Minnesota man who killed 2 teenagers who broke into his home can be heard on an audio recording talking to himself for hours after the shooting, and at one point apparently describing the slain teens as vermin. Byron Smith of Little Falls faces first-degree premeditated murder charges in the deaths of 18-year-old Haley Kiefer and 17-year-old Nick Brady on Thanksgiving Day in 2012. Smith, who is 65 years old, claimed he was defending himself and feared for his life after several break-ins at his home. Prosecutors, though, say Smith planned the killings. They say he sat in a chair in his basement and waited for the teens to enter his home instead of calling police. Smith waited a full day after he shot them before asking a neighbor to call the authorities.
An American subcontractor jailed in Cuba after working to set up an internet network that would escape detection by the Cuban government, is vowing that he will not spend another birthday there. Alan Gross left open what he meant by his comment. It did not specify whether he would attempt another hunger strike. He will be 65 on May 2nd. Gross was jailed 4.5 years ago for smuggling communications equipment into Cuba on behalf of a United States aid program deemed illegal by the communist government, reported by CBS.
And from the Associated Press, movie critic Roger Ebert's final blog posting last April ended with his hopeful sign-off, quote, "I'll see you at the movies," unquote. The award-winning film critic died 2 days later. Visitors to the Central Illinois Theater that hosts the annual Ebert Fest film festival that he started now may feel like they saw him at the movies. A life-sized bronze statue of Roger Ebert, a longtime Chicago Sun-Times critic, will be formally unveiled today outside of the Virginia Theater in Champaign, which is next to Urbana, where Ebert grew up. His wife, Chaz Ebert, described the statue as interactive art because it shows her late husband giving his famous thumbs up sign and sitting between two empty theater seats where visitors can sit. Roger, he would feel honored that someone wanted to do this for him, but he almost would feel embarrassed because he was so modest, Chaz Ebert said, but he would be very grateful that they thought enough of him to do it. Ebert died at the age of 70 after a long battle with cancer.
The National Rifle Association has decided to stop publicly opposing a law that would require those accused of domestic violence to surrender their guns. The one stipulation to the NRA's lack of public opposition is that they were able to convince lawmakers to make a few changes to the bill that would loosen its requirements. Instead of being required to hand over their guns to police or a licensed gun dealer, those accused of domestic violence can hand over their weapons to a friend or a family member approved by a judge. The NRA's move comes after one of their prominent members in New York City and the surrounding suburbs was arrested on domestic violence charges in March 2013. He pleaded guilty to harassing his wife, and when police came to his home, they found 39 guns in the house, reported by UPI.
And the next story is from the New York Times. Religious leaders are slamming a documentary to be shown at the nation's premier 9/11 museum because it might make people believe that Islam was responsible for the attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people. Already, the lone imam on an interfaith advisory group to the National September 11th Memorial Museum has quit in protest at the 7-minute documentary. Unsophisticated visitors, he said, who do not understand the difference between Al-Qaeda and Muslims may come away with a prejudiced view of Islam, leading to antagonism and even confrontation toward Muslim believers near the site. That's a quote from Sheikh Mustafa El-Azabawi, the imam of Masjid Manhattan. He wrote that in a letter to the museum director. But the museum stands by the film, narrated by NBC News anchor Brian Williams, saying, quote, "We have a very heavy responsibility to be true to the facts, to be objective, and in no way smear an entire religion when we are talking about a terrorist group," unquote. The quote is credited to Joseph Daniels, president of the nonprofit foundation that is overseeing the museum. The film, titled The Rise of Al-Qaeda, seeks to explain the historical roots of the 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. According to the New York Times, it will be shown to visitors in a part of the museum next to a gallery with photographs of the 19 men who hijacked 4 planes.
A plan to create new ethical rules for local governments in Florida is dead because the sponsor has killed his own bill. That's not unusual, according to observers who say state lawmakers withdraw bills all the time. But Senator Joe Abruzzo called a press conference to announce he was pulling the plug on his own legislation. He admits it was a bit odd. Abruzzo withdrew the bill after concerns that it was applying a state-level fix, making it cumbersome at best when it came to municipal issues. Abruzzo says he'll be working with groups like Common Cause and the League of Women Voters to come up with a new ethics bill for next year's legislative session, reported by by the Florida News Network.
And this story is from CNN. Long waiting times have resulted in the deaths of at least 40 veterans at the Phoenix Veterans Affairs healthcare system, according to CNN. Many of them died while listed on a secret waiting list whose purpose was to conceal how long patients actually had to wait before being seen by a physician, according to the cable news network. Upwards to 1,600 veterans were forced to wait months for their medical appointments. 2 appointment lists are maintained, according to CNN, an official computerized sham roster, which shows veterans seeing doctors on a timely basis, and then a secret, genuine waiting list. The scheme was deliberately put into place to avoid the VA's own internal rules, according to Dr. Sam Foote, who recently retired from the VA system. I feel very sorry for the people who work at the Phoenix VA, said Foote. They're all frustrated. They're all upset. They all wish they could leave because they know what they're doing is wrong. He made that statement to reporters for CNN. One victim of the secret waiting list was 71-year-old Navy veteran Thomas Breen. He was rushed to the VA emergency room on September 28th of last year, complaining of blood in his urine. ER staff marked his case urgent to be seen by a primary care urologist within 1 week and sent him home to wait. Breen died painfully of stage 4 bladder cancer on November 30th. The VA hospital did not call with his appointment until December 6th.
The city of Wausau, Wisconsin took the first step recently to create new ordinances intended to make it easier for police to crack down on prostitution in the area. The Public Health and Safety Committee Monday unanimously recommended the council adopt the measures at the request of the police department. By licensing legal escorts who accept money for companionship or to perform stripteases, police hope to make it easier to catch those who illegally solicit prostitution. Police say proving a suspected prostitute has violated the escort ordinance requires less evidence than proving a prostitution violation. Online classified sites such as Backpage and Craigslist have made it easier for prostitutes to advertise services in the area. Wausau police have arrested 10 in prostitution stings this year so far. Barnes said the ordinance would help police continue to crack down on prostitution without performing similar stings, which are costly and time-consuming. Under a draft of the ordinance, escorts or escort services that are not licensed could be fined between $2,000 and $5,000, the same charge as in Weston. The license fee would be $500. Reported by the Wausau Daily Herald.
Wisconsin.
That's right.
All right,
They're progressive.
The next story is out of, oh my goodness, my computer stopped. Here it goes. The next story is from, I don't know who the news agency is. Let me just read it. Newsmax. It's from Newsmax. Okay. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI will be attending the canonization of Popes John the 23rd and John Paul II on Sunday, according to an announcement from a senior church official issued yesterday. Rome will witness an event that's never happened in the city's history. 2 living popes and 2 pope saints, said Messenger Liberio Andreatta in a statement to reporters. The vice president of Rome's pilgrimage office was not able to say whether Benedict would be concelebrating the Mass in St. Peter's Square, but his presence will be the 3rd time he's appeared in public since his renunciation of the papacy last year. Earlier this week, the Vatican said it wouldn't be sure of his attendance until the morning of the event. Speaking to Newsmax yesterday, Andrietta, who is helping to lead the church's organization of the canonization, said Rome is well prepared and that he's confident everything will go okay. A veteran of such events who has helped organize papal funerals, conclaves, and Jubilee celebrations for over 40 years, he said it seems chaotic because there's so much to do.
A wild naked man snarled Los Angeles traffic after provocatively climbing on the roof of his red Tesla sports car and taunting responding firefighters in the Buff. The unidentified nudist, filmed along the Pacific Coast Highway on Tuesday, appeared to soak up more than just his 15 minutes of fame as cars on both sides crawled past him undeniably while having a look. In a provocative video uploaded to YouTube, Pacific Palisade firefighters are seen attempting to coax the man down. Throughout their endeavor, the man proudly stretches and flaps like a bird and wiggles in and out of his sunroof while throwing clothes in the air. Reported by the Palasadian Post.
And from ABC News, President Obama warned more U.S. sanctions on Russia are teed up and ready to go, signaling that if Russia does not reverse course in eastern Ukraine, it will face additional consequences in days, not weeks. And that's a quote from the president. But even as he threatened further sanctions, Obama acknowledged it is entirely possible that new economic penalties will not work to change Russian President Vladimir Putin's calculus on Ukraine. So far, the evidence doesn't make me hopeful, the president said. Assuming they don't follow through, then we'll follow through on what we said. Which is tighter consequences on the Russians.
Western military intervention in the Middle East has so far failed due to the distorting impact of an Islamic extremism so opposed to modernity that it could yet engender global catastrophe. Tony Blair was warning this yesterday in a keynote speech on the state of politics in the Middle East. With support for intervention ebbing fast, especially in Britain, Blair urged a willfully blind West to realize that it must take sides and, if necessary, make common cause with Russia and China in the G20 to counter the Islamic extremism that lies at the root of all failures of Western intervention, reported by The Guardian.
And from ABC News, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton expressed her frustrations about the current state of media yesterday evening, describing what she sees as an entertainment-driven approach to news that is not good for the country and not good for journalism. The potential 2016 front-runner, 66-year-old Hillary Clinton, made her less than flattering comments during a question-and-answer session at her first-ever appearance at the University of Connecticut following her keynote address at the Edmund Fusco Contemporary Issues Forum, in which 2,300 students and faculty were in attendance. Using questions submitted by students, University President Susan Herbst asked Clinton about the role journalists could play in resolving the gridlock in Congress. Clinton took the question and ran with it, saying, quote, "I think journalism has changed quite a bit in a way that it is not good for the country and not good for journalism." She vented about her concern that a more ratings-driven approach to television has led to theatrics over facts.
General Motors has asked a U.S. court to bar some lawsuits relating to its recall over faulty ignition switches. The faulty switches could turn off the engine, disabling the airbags, and have been linked to at least a dozen deaths. The recall was issued earlier this year, but GM has admitted some employees knew about the problem as early as 2004. GM has asked the court to ban cases alleging purely economic damages due to the recall. It does not affect cases relating to accidents or injury. The firm has been hit by various lawsuits since the recalls began this year, reported by the BBC.
And from Bloomberg, the housing recovery in the United States is running out of steam as buyers balk at record prices and higher mortgage rates that are making properties less affordable. Sales dropped a surprising 14.5% to a 384,000 annualized pace, lower than any forecast of economists surveyed by Bloomberg, and the weakest since July, according to data compiled by the Commerce Department. 3 of the 4 regions saw setbacks, with demand in the West slumping in the lowest level in more than 2 years. More expensive properties, borrowing costs that have jumped almost a percentage point from last year, and lenders unwilling to go out on a limb are challenging an industry still emerging from its worst slump since the Great Depression.
The head of the Louisiana GOP filed a federal ethics complaint yesterday against Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, claiming the Nevada Democrat has misused taxpayer money for campaign purposes ahead of the 2016 2014 midterm elections as part of his ongoing crusade against GOP megadonors Charles and David Koch. He's calling on the lawmakers to investigate whether Mr. Reid is engaged in campaign activities using staff, equipment, and facilities paid for with public funds, reported by the Washington Times.
And that's all the time we have for News Bites. Remember, we do this each weekday morning at 8:35. We take about 25 minutes to read you the news, and we shorten it so that you can hear as many stories as possible. Robin, how many stories did we get in today?
25.
25. Hang in there. Veterans News is up next with Hank Whittier. This is The Source, WOCA Ocala.
Fox News Radio, I'm Lillian Wu. Murder at an Afghan hospital as a guard assigned to protect it turns his gun on a group of doctors, killing 3 American physicians, injuring a nurse.
A spokesman for the Interior Ministry says he's now in custody.
Police has arrested that